off of. Couple housekeeping right through the door here. There's drinks available. Also in the back of the room we have some water available. Through this door to the right, if you take a hard right, is the men's bathroom, and then across the hall is the women's bathroom. Pretty informal. We want to answer your questions that you have, and so if you have questions that come up during the presentation, if it's appropriate, go ahead and stop us. We would be happy to discuss that. And then afterwards, Vicki and the Safe Produce Council is providing lunch. And so all of the Game and Fish employees will be staying around so we can talk to you one-on-one. If you have a specific question, if you think it's something that the group would benefit from, please bring it up during the presentation. That way we can address it and everyone can get that information. So, quick introductions. Right here is Richard Myers. He's the wildlife manager for Yuma North, so he kind of covers the Gila River Valley area. Josie Robledo, she's Yuma South, so she kind of covers the very low portion of the Gila River Valley and then everything, the Yuma Valley and the Yuma Mesa. So if you guys have your fields down in that area, that's who's your contact's going to be. We have Dan Urquidez. He's retired for the last year. He was the wildlife manager out of the Welton Mohawk area. And he has a lot of institutional knowledge about the process that we've gone through to get to this point. So appreciate him coming back and being a resource again. Currently, the wildlife manager position that Dan retired from is still vacant. Hopefully this next year we'll get someone in there so that we can give you a local resource. But for now, I'll cover that area, between Richard, Josie, and I. We can get some good coverage out into the Welton Mohawk area as well. And then Vicki Scott, she's with the Yuma Safe Produce Council, and she'll be talking here in just a minute, kind of give you a background. And in addition, we also have David Coons. So he is our terrestrial wildlife specialist out of Yuma. And if you guys need a depredation permit, which Richard will talk about here in a little bit, he's the resource that you're going to use for that. We also have Chris Benninger here. He's videoing the presentation. We're going to upload it to YouTube so that it'll be available to you. If you have anyone else that would benefit from this information, it'll be available. Also online is the 2015 presentation that we did. So it's a good resource as well. Might have some additional information we miss here. Be a resource for you. And we're going to send out the link afterwards. Once we get that uploaded, we'll send an email out to everyone and let them know how to find those resources. And then Mike Sumner, he's the regional supervisor for Game and Fish. He'll be here for a little bit. And so he was in my position before he's promoted to regional supervisor. So he's a wealth of knowledge as well on the kind of the process to get to where we're at now. All right, so the Game and Fish Department's mission is to conserve Arizona's diverse wildlife resources and manage for safe, compatible outdoor recreation opportunities for current and future generations. So wildlife in North America, we have what we call the North American model of wildlife management. Wildlife is owned by the public and held in trust by the state. So the state Game and Fish Department, Fish and Wildlife, or we go by a couple different names for Arizona, so Arizona Game and Fish. We are responsible for managing that resource, that public resource in the state. And so it's different than in other countries where the wildlife belongs to the landowner. For Arizona, or for the North America, the wildlife is occupying private lands, but it's still a public resource. Purpose and objectives of the workshop today. We want to open channels of communication in an effort to pursue management opportunities and solutions to wildlife-related agriculture issues. We want to introduce ourselves, make those connections, let you know who to contact for which issue you're having related to wildlife. We're going to talk about crop depredation, contamination, measures to reduce wildlife intrusions, the laws and legalities, wildlife ID, and risk assessment, and then obviously contacts so that you can reach out to us one-on-one and we can hopefully build those relationships. Vicki, if you want to come up and
slide for me? Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we're really grateful to the Game and Fish for doing this workshop again. It's been a few years, and I see a lot of new faces that probably didn't have the opportunity to go to it before. And for those of you that are food safety directors or specialists in the audience, you guys are well aware of the challenges that we have with wildlife and the food safety hazards and risks that they present to all of us. So we're really happy that they're going to give us some tools to put in our toolbox so that we can legally address animal intrusion that we might have in our fields. And all of us that grow in this area have to participate in the Arizona LGMA, or California if you're on the other side of the border. And so we're well aware of the requirements that we have with regards to evaluating the impacts of animals on our crops. You know, we have to have that low, is it a low risk, is it a medium, a high risk, and those things are defined by our own standard operating procedures. So once we, have to create those standard operating procedures, presentations like this help us fine-tune those presentations, those SOPs, and we can create, better programs for ourselves and incorporate the other things that are required in the LGMA, which are things like buffers, right? We have buffers based on what type of animal intrusion we've had, based on topography. Sometimes the LGMA buffers are not enough. You may have additional customer requirements, right? But we're all aware of the impacts of animal intrusion, and that we can have crop loss, right? We all experience that from time to time, depending on what the intrusion has been. Sometimes it's small, sometimes it's large, especially with birds. And we're going to talk a little bit about birds, right, too. So I think that's great. So we didn't want to go into a big, long metrics explanation or anything like that. But if you have any questions that are related to metrics, please feel free to get a hold of me. I think most of you know how to track me down, right? So again, thank you guys for doing this for us.
Absolutely.
And we're looking forward to adding some more tools to our toolbox.
Thanks, Vicki. And by the way, there's some resources up on this front table for you. Vicki has put together a workshop binder that will have all the information that we're presenting today, as well as our contact information. Make sure that you sign in. Also, Richard and I, we've got business cards up here. Go ahead and grab those. That'll be a resource if you need to reach out to us. We can, even if Richard may not be the local wildlife manager, we can at least get you in contact with who you need to get that information from. All right, foodborne pathogens. So there are various strains of E. coli, Salmonella, Listeria, and various other bacteria, microbes, and viruses that are harmful to humans and have been linked with foodborne illness outbreaks. I'm not a microbiologist. I don't claim to be well versed in that background, but that's basically the crux of the problem is that these wildlife intrusions. The concern is the addition of these pathogens onto the crop, and so that's where the kind of the intersection of our two worlds collide. And so we've got some resources. Paul is a good resource. There's lot more knowledge out there on kind of the microbial side of things that you know, are you planning on staying till after the lunch? So Paula would be a resource if you got some specific questions there. Basically, not all strains of E. coli are pathogenic to humans, which means that they make you sick, but there are a few that do, and they're of high concern for the leafy green produce. Because they can be passed from animals to humans and cause disease in humans. So that's the concern. All right, research. Currently, the U of A is conducting a research project in the Yuma area, and one of the big questions is for wildlife and livestock, and how those pathogens are passed through the environment. There's reservoirs that contain basically the microbe, and then there's vectors that can pass it through the system. And so there's a lot of question on where are these pathogenic microbes persisting in the environment, how are they moving through the landscape. And so there's a lot of questions out there, but at the end of the day, you know, what we need is to keep those pathogens off of the produce. So there's a lot of good research going on. If you got questions on that, please reach out to us. We can give you a little bit more information ongoing. So hopefully in the next year or two, we'll have a little bit more information there. Animal intrusions. Again, the difference between domestic animals and wildlife, and how the pathogens can move through the environment. Track and scat, glove box guide. Yosie's going to talk about animal ID, because a big part of this is identifying which animals you have that are entering your fields, and that's going to direct on what your options are to address the situation. All right, domestic animals that are moderate to high risk include cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, and chickens. Wildlife species include bighorn sheep, rodents, rabbits, javelina, coyotes, and bird species. In general, all animals and wildlife pose a risk as vectors for pathogens. Again, the question is where are those pathogens in the environment, and how are they getting onto the produce? Is it birds that are picking it up at a water source and bringing it in? Is it actually in their digestive system? How that all moves through the environment is a unknown. And so, obviously, if we can preclude the animals from entering the fields, then we kind of cut that off without having to know, I guess, that question. Clean farming practices. I think everyone practices these anymore. That's as far as, you know, having a sterile landscape. We don't have hedgerows anymore. Those environments that can hold, you know, the rabbits and the rodents next to the fields. But what we do have is the river corridors in the Yuma Valley, the Gila River Valley, and those natural water courses that have natural vegetation that do hold those animals. Identify opportunities and solutions for food safety and wildlife conservation. You know, from our perspective, it's not an either-or question, it's an and question. How can we have food safety and have wildlife conservation? And that's what we're really working towards, is identifying issues when they arise and try to come to an acceptable solution that will provide for wildlife management and for food safety. Evaluating options to address wildlife conflicts. So we've got a few options. Tolerance. Simple solution, consider the role of predators in controlling other species, not always possible. So if we have an alfalfa field, right, is there an issue with having wildlife intrusions into an alfalfa field? In and of itself, no, because you're not going to be passing those pathogens on into the human food source. So is that a possibility, putting up buffer crops, putting up buffers where animals can persist and then not come into the produce fields? And not always possible, obviously. If it's a produce field, we can't have those intrusions. Removal, often the damage is already done if the animals have come to the field, and usually requires intensive and sustained effort, and generally a short-term result. So if you have a field that is experiencing wildlife intrusions, if you remove those individual animals that are coming into the field, that field is still going to be an attractant, and there's still going to be a source somewhere that those animals are coming from. And so removal can be an option for short term, especially if you've got a crop that you're trying to get harvested, so you have a short window when it's really intense that you don't have any of those intrusions. Can be an option. And then the best option long term is exclusion. There's a large initial effort and investment, right? This is fencing and some of the other exclusionary deterrent type options that we have, but it's the best long-term solution. So one of the big culprits out there that causes a lot of issue is deer. Deer are very susceptible to exclusionary fencing. So if you put up a fence, you can keep that intrusion from occurring. Birds, on the other hand, since they can fly, it's much more difficult to actually exclude them. And so you have to understand what animals causing the issue and what our options are. But I think it's pretty widespread and understood that fencing is really kind of the best long-term solution for deer, javelina, rabbits, and can be excluded through fencing if the fences are put in correctly. Other animals like raccoons, right? Raccoons are not susceptible to fencing because they can just climb over whatever kind of fence you can put in. Birds, rodents, because unless you actually bury the fence into the ground, rodents need such a small area to cross those fences. It's really hard to get a fencing that's not permeable to rodents. So. All right, removal, non-lethal, and lethal. So non-lethal, we have hazing, which works for any kind of animal. Again, you want to know what their biology is. Are they active during the day or at night? For birds, you have to have hazing during daylight hours when the birds are active. For deer and rodents, a lot of those animals are nocturnal, so you're going to have to do nighttime hazing activities for that to work for you. Lethal trapping, many variables, including public land restrictions. And so we want to, there's some laws, rules, and regulations that Richard's going to go into that sometimes trapping can be a viable option, and sometimes it's not going to be. Shooting, legal methods for hunting. Again, David can help you out if you've got special permits, if you need special permits to do removals outside of hunting seasons or hunting regulations. There's some exemptions in there. Rodenticides, application restrictions. So if you're using any type of poison, you need to be careful that you're not impacting non-target species. There's some restrictions there. As far as the type of bait. So if you get a rodenticide that's on like a grain, that's very likely to get picked up by non-target species that you could impact and could get you in trouble with the law if that's not an acceptable removal. So you want to be careful on how you're applying these techniques so that you're not having non-target removal. Yeah, some types pose higher risk secondary exposures and predators. So think about if you're poisoning rodents and then eagles are coming in and eating those. There's some actual restrictions that you can't take, certain bird species. So if that's occurring, you could end up in trouble. So that's what we want to keep everyone out of trouble. We want to get these acceptable solutions to the depredation problem that you're experiencing. There's a T-trap. This can protect if you have either a trap or rodenticide in there from non-target animals accessing them. Trapping. There's restrictions for trapping. Using foothold traps is restricted to private property, and so if you have a field that's on a state lease, foothold traps isn't an option for you. So you need to know that those restrictions do apply. All right, exclusions. Again, fencing is animal specific. If you're trying to keep out a deer, you're going to have a different fence than if you're trying to keep out a rabbit. Cattle guards. So fencing is only as effective as you can keep it up. And so when people started first putting up these fences, they were putting in gates. And what's the problem with the gate? The gate only works if it's closed. And so, they'd get open during the day and then not closed at night, so the deer were just walking through the gates. They knew where those gates were, and if they're not maintained, they still allow access. We got canals that, depending on the width of them, may or may not be a barrier, depending on what species you are. If you're concerned with, the deer can jump quite a distance, and so for any of the smaller lateral canals, that's really not a barrier to them. Some of the main canals did. Sensory barriers. So, all right, sensory barriers. We have scarecrows, silhouettes, hazing, lighting, sound, scent. These sensory barriers have kind of a law of diminishing returns. The longer that it's in one place doing the same thing, the less effective it's going to be. So for any of these, if you take and move them around the fields, change where they're at, change what they're doing, you're going to have higher success with them. If you put a sound cannon out, it'll be effective to start with, but then once the animals figure out that it's not causing harm, it becomes less effective. So you kind of need to change it up as it's going, as you're using these barriers. Crop manipulation, buffer crops, select plantings. Determine on your rotation. If there's a crop, if you can put crops in different places based off of where those animals have escape cover. Where they're coming from, if you can put short stop them from coming into the fields. So those are all things that you want to think about to try to alleviate these problems or these intrusions. Waste piles. If you harvest a field and you're experiencing intrusions into it, could you take, if you harvest a field over here, could you take the waste product from that field and short stop those animals from coming into the next field that you're going to harvest, those kinds of things. anyways, long story short is there's a lot of options out there, and for each situation is unique, and it's a matter of trying these different options and finding what works for you. There's a cattle guard. Again, these scarecrows, when you first put them up, they're new and they'll exclude wildlife, but then once the wildlife figure out that they're not moving, they're not doing anything, they lose their effectiveness. Same with sound cannon. There's the waste pile, so here's the riverbed that's providing the wildlife habitat and where the wildlife are coming from. So if they can get their meal off of the field, then that reduces the likelihood that they're going to come into the field and cause that intrusion.
Mike, there's no rules for feeding them like that? We can give them food like that? Are there any species that we're not allowed to feed like that?
I'm not aware of any species that you're not allowed to do that.
I was just going to say that if you bait them, that they wouldn't be susceptible to being hunted, because we have a year-round hunt in the Mohawk Valley. So a hunter couldn't take advantage of that opportunity.
That's a better way to frame that question that I asked. The difference between what would be considered baiting them versus just a waste pile and feeding them.
So if that's part of normal agricultural practices, which, if you're trying to protect a field, so you're providing a food source to shortstop those animals from coming in, is different than, the public who has a deer tag that puts out a bale of alfalfa to try to get deer to come into a spot so they can harvest it. So you can see the difference there. But what we don't want to do is create that situation where we're artificially attracting animals to a place and then putting hunters in there, something like that. So, again, kind of the difference is you're not trying to attract animals, you're trying to protect a resource that you have out there, so that's part of your agricultural practices that you're implementing out there.
So would it be best to let you guys know that is the situation that's going on, just so you don't
we always
the wrong
appreciate
idea that we're trying to
we
encourage animals?
always appreciate the information, because what that allows us to do is help address the problem kind of on a bigger scale. So, you have the fields that you're responsible for, so you've got kind of, your world that you're trying to interact with, but that could have a bigger overall effect. So we need to be aware of kind of what's going on where, and Richard's going to get into some of the options for depredation, some of the things you can and can't do. So we want to be aware of that, so that, if we get a call that, hey, somebody's out here doing this activity that appears to be illegal, well, we know it's this ranch that's doing it, or it's occurring on this ranch, and we know that ranch has a depredation permit to do that activity. Because you do have the option of doing some things that's not considered legal take in the hunting, realm. But again, there's some other issues.
Yeah, if I could go into about the bait pile too, I'll cover that, but we have a law that allows reasonable measures for farms if they have depredation. And it wouldn't be a bait pile, it's just, it's something that you're doing that's allowed under the law as a bait pile under depredation standards. So I'll cover that.
You're providing an alternative food source to protect your crop. You're not attempting to bait deer are less likely to breach a fence if it's erected before they become accustomed to using a field. Later installation may make it more difficult to overcome the herd memory. So if you're rotating crops, if you're going to rotate in a crop that is more palatable to wildlife than what was there previous, if you can put those exclusionary fences up before that, you're going to have higher success. Once, if deer are established using a path and you put up a fence, they're likely to try to overcome that fence. And I'm sure Dan can talk about when fences first started going up, there was a lot of issues with those deer trying to get through those fences. It was new to them. They were used to going to these areas. And then once they're established, once they figured out that they're no longer, if they can no longer go to those fields, they'll switch their habits, but there's a learning process there that can, that we have to overcome. So be aware of that. I think we get in here on the fencing for the, when you put up a fence, have kind of a strategy if animals get into the fence on how to get them out again. Because especially when that first comes up, you're going to have those kinds of issues. Investigate, test, and seek out weaknesses. Again, this herd memory, they just like us, they can teach their offspring and then teach others on where food sources are and how to move about the landscape. And it's going to require consistent inspection and repair, especially for the new fences. Again, once they're established, you have to maintain the fences, but you have less of those kind of testing of the fencing system. And hazing is also likely to remain an important component. Again, especially depending on what animal you're trying to exclude from that field. If it's birds, it's not really possible to put a bird-proof fence around a field. So we're going to have to rely on some of these other options. Fencing, use terrain, ditches, rock piles, etc. to increase effectiveness. Slope increases the barrier. So I've noticed on a lot of fields that, we'll put fences up along the canals, right along the edge of the canal, and what that does is it increases the effective height of that fence. So you can see here with a 42-inch fence in each scenario, but with a 30% slope that goes up to a 62-inch fence, and 50% slope, 75% or 75-inch fence. So you can see that you can increase. You can have a shorter fence if it's on top of a hill, or the canal bank, versus if it was just on flat ground. Gates and access points may be the weak link. Cattle guards. You notice this is a double cattle guard, and we've even increased that to suggesting a triple cattle guard because deer can jump a great distance, and so if you have just a single cattle guard, most deer will just walk up to it and hop right over it. It won't act as a barrier. So evaluate when you're putting these up on how that's going to affect the effectiveness of the fence. I've noticed a lot of the fencing that goes up out there goes basically along or between the fields and the habitat, so along the river corridor. But if both ends are open, those deer are just going to walk around those ends and get into the field. And they'll go great distances. You got to understand that wildlife has a different perspective of space than what humans do. And it's nothing for them to walk a mile or two or get around a fence if they're trying to get to a resource. So they're fully capable of doing that. You watch them walk right down county roads, have fences on both sides, and they'll use those as the travel corridors, especially at night. There's some resources out there. Again, I'm not going to go into this. This is in your booklet, so you can look up these studies and actually dig into them a little bit more. Again, we're all resources, so if you have specific questions, you want a little bit more information, reach out to us. Electric fencing for various species can be effective, or it may not be. So again, and this is in the back of the binders. You want to evaluate the different systems before you go and implement something. Make sure that you're going to be successful, because what we saw with a lot of the early fencing strategies were that they would put up the fencing and it didn't create the exclusion that the farms were looking for. So we don't want to be wasting effort there. And I think it's probably widespread enough that people have kind of figured out what works and what doesn't. Economics of fencing. All right. So losses experienced versus cost of installation. We realize that with temporary leases that you might have, putting in this type of infrastructure is very costly and may not be cost effective. But you got to weigh that against the crop that you're growing there and what the ramifications of having intrusions into that crop are. So you have to do a cost benefit analysis of this. Size and shape. If you have 1 square mile that you're trying to fence, you got to put up 4 miles of fence to exclude that. Versus if you have 4 square miles, you've got 8. So it's not linear. And again, realizing that between different parcels that you're farming, you may not have continuous border. And so it really takes a lot for neighboring farms to communicate with each other, come up with a plan so that instead of each farm putting up exclusionary fences around their field, if you can work with each other, they can put up half of the fence and you can put up half of the fence, and you achieve the goal of protecting that crop, or each of you protecting your crop. Again, sensory barriers, the big thing with these is that they need to be changed. You can't just go put them out on the landscape and walk away and expect them to provide benefit long term. They're going to lose their effectiveness over time. You have to kind of keep changing up where the scarecrows are, where the flagging is, where the sound cannons are, hazers if you're going to be doing it at night or during the day. So you want to change all of that up, because as soon as you become predictable in what you're doing, the animals figure that out very quickly. If they want that resource, if they want to eat in that field, they're going to figure that out. They're going to work around your barriers. All right. Any questions about what we've gone through so far?
How often do you think you need to move those around? I mean, every 2 days, every week?
It's going to depend on what food crop you have, what stage of growth it's at, because obviously there's going to be those animals are going to be coming into that field for different reasons. Is it the new growth that's just coming up and you're experiencing the depredation? Is it once it's established and that the melons are coming into being mature? You may not have any intrusions up until that point. And so, if it's a melon field that's coming into being ripe, you may have to do it quite often. There's going to be a lot of pressure from those animals to want to get to that crop, versus when it's early in the growing stage that it could be very long. And that's what's so difficult about this, is that every field is different, every crop is different. You're experiencing different intrusions. Are you getting birds from a feedlot? Is that where the birds are coming from, or is it coming from the river valley? Is it deer that are coming from the desert, or is it they're coming from the river valley? Are they having to cross a great distance to get to your field, or is there cover right up to the edge? And so that's why we want to open these lines of communications, give you some ideas to think about, but it's really going to take some one-on-one working with each other to try to figure out the best solution for your individual issue that you're encountering. Any other questions? Richard?
Yeah, and I'm going to get into that, but that's kind of the overall arching message out of all this. And I'm going to cover some of the laws and rules, but basically work with us, because this can be overwhelming, and especially into this segment of laws and rules, right? So nobody wants to get in trouble out there. what can I do, right? So I'm going to cover some of that stuff that protects you guys and allows you to do these things that we're talking about. So all these depredation measures, we're going to talk about how you're covered with that, okay? Again, a little background on me. I know he introduced me earlier. I'm the wildlife manager. My main area is the Gila Valley, a little east of Yuma here. I have the Highway 95 corridor all the way up there to Yuma Proving Grounds. But as we have empty districts, I cover all the Yuma area, so I'm kind of familiar with the whole Yuma area. My area, I mostly deal with bird depredation. I don't have big game like deer that come into fields, mostly in the Gila Valley. So out west, out east a little way, that's more where the deer are. So that's kind of a little history of me. I was at the last workshop we had in 2015, and there's been a lot of things that has changed in 5 years or 4 years in the ag industry. A lot of things that have worked since our last workshop. So it'll be pretty interesting, and Dan's going to show us some things that have worked since that last workshop. So that'll be pretty interesting. But basically, ARS 17239, that is a state law that we have in the books that addresses these things that you guys have, right? So private party, whether it be a homeowner having an issue with their pet chickens, their dogs or cats, to the ag industry, this is the law that protects you guys and allows you to do these things, okay? The law understands and the state understands that although we're protecting wildlife, that's our mission for game and fish, wildlife don't just stay in a bubble, right? They don't stay in the wild. They are urban, they live in urban environments, and we address this under this law. You guys have got to do your mission, we got to do ours, and so this is the law that allows you guys to do a lot of these measures we're talking about, right? So we'll kind of break this down, but this is Arizona revised statute under our state laws, under Title 17, which is under our hunting and fishing laws. Arizona law books are about that big, and this is one subsection of all of our state laws, okay? It lives in the hunting and fishing section. So we'll just read it. So basically, any person suffering property damage from wildlife, so the ag industry, you're having crop damage, depredation, that fulfills that, may exercise all reasonable measures, okay? What's that mean? Well, we'll get into it in the slide, but it's basically the things we've been talking about, some of the techniques, right? But reasonable measures shall not include this, right? Injuring or killing game mammals, game birds, or wildlife protected by federal law or regulation, okay? That's what gets a lot of people, at least in the last workshop, they're like, what species are those, right? So I'll cover a little bit of that, but the whole thing is if you're working with us, we're gonna work through this with you, and we'll identify what laws protect you, what's covered under this, and so that's kind of the message, work with us, and you don't have to worry too much about this stuff. We'll help you out, okay? So we'll kind of go forward on that. So it just talks about more of that. If you implement these measures on your farms, right, a lot of things we've been talking about. If you're having frustrations, it's not working. Basically, this message is get with us, get with Game and Fish, and we'll work with you guys, okay? We'll try some of these reasonable measures first, and we'll provide technical assistance, right, from just the history of the lessons we've learned, right? Because this is always a learning curve, right? We try things, they don't work, we try other things. Wildlife move, so we have areas where wildlife never was. And so just get with us and we'll try these different things, use our technical advice, and we'll try some of these anti-depredation measures, okay? Which includes the things we're talking about. Maybe it's trapping, capturing, or relocating animals, right? And we'll get into a little bit of that in a little bit. And so if these depredation measures aren't working, the Game and Fish can authorize special seasons, special permits that we were talking about, right? We have these small game depredation permits. That's a special permit that will allow you to take, and what we mean by take is kill some of these things that are protected under that law, right? So it says you can't kill game animals or game birds, but we can authorize special permits if the reasonable measures aren't working, all right? So there's ways that we can still take these game animals, right? And we define those. Game animals are usually things you can hunt, right? Like the deer that are out there, cottontail rabbits, right? Things like that. So we can give you special permits to bypass this law, right? So the exceptions, right? so depredation measures. So the main key about this is just contact us, all right? We've had a lot of success in areas, in the Yuma area, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? So there's a lot of things that have worked. A lot of farms are implementing things out there. I know most of you are probably doing a lot of the stuff we're talking about, especially for bird depredation right now. I know there's, as you plant seed, I see the cannons out there, I see the T-traps. So you guys are already doing this stuff, but if it's not working, the key is get with us and see if there's something new that might be working out there, right? And when you do, we're gonna go out there. I mean, that's the key, is to go out there on that specific field and see what the issue is. Like Mike Rice was saying, each field is different. It has different species that are utilizing it. You know, the habitat cover and food are different in each location, so the measures we take might be different, okay? So that's why it's important for you to contact us and us to do a field visit out there. So again, we want to do these reasonable measures, and that's where that site visit comes in handy. We can see what what kind of techniques we can use. And then we'll follow up with any other recommendations that we need. So if these depredation measures aren't working, we can look at these other options, like I said, special permits, or maybe some special hunts, right? Which we have used successfully, okay? So there's some other things we can do. And we talked about that, special hunts. And Dan will cover some of that stuff too in his presentation. Farmers that have used reasonable measures, but they haven't been working. And so we've issued special hunts on those protected game mammals, right, that law doesn't allow you to kill. We've implemented some special hunts that have kind of worked, maybe not worked, but we'll talk about that. So.
What's your response time? I call, you're out there immediately, I mean, you're able to do a lot of it, you know?
What's that? I'm sorry?
What's your response time on a reporting? And what is it? I mean,
Oh, yeah, if a farm calls Game and Fish and gets a hold of one of us, as soon as our schedule allows, we'll go out there and go see what the problem is and start working with you.
How long does it take for the paperwork to go through?
The permit?
Permits and all
Yeah,
that?
yeah, it depends on the type of permit. So for a small game depredation permit, which I'll get into, it's very simple. It's a state permit at our office, Game and Fish, and it's a one-page pretty simple permit. And basically that permit to take small game, okay, so that's more for the small game depredation permit, for like rabbits and things like that. Very simple. Pretty much all you do is you come into the office, explain you're having problems, you've taken some of the reasonable measures, okay? And then just work with us. We'll go out there, see what the issue is, and you demonstrate what's going on, and you basically fill out an application. There's a is it free application, I believe? Or is it a fee? I think it's free. And then we'll write it up and give you a permit that authorizes you to take that species, okay? What we mean by take is killing that species, okay? And we even give you some other additional methods that the law doesn't allow by default. So it might be that we allow you to spotlight these things at night and shoot them with a shotgun, okay? Normal hunting, you can't do that, but this special permit will allow some of those special considerations.
Is there a time limit expiration? Is it seasonal?
Yeah, these permits do have a length of time and species specific. So we write out for the certain species and the allowed methods. It's kind of written out, so we're on the same page. And that's for the Game and Fish special permit. Now, for something a little higher level, if we're going to implement a deer hunt, a special deer hunt, a population management hunt for the depredation for deer, for example, it's a little more lengthy process, a little bit more time delay. Okay, that has to go a little higher up the chain because it is one of our huntable big game species that we manage for, and so that takes a little longer. Does that kind of answer your question, the permits?
And Halloween, I think big problem there with that.
Yes. In Javelina too, we have created some population management hunts or over-the-counter tags for Javelina out east. And so we have that currently going. But that was another one that took some time to go up the chain because it's one of our big game species. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep.
Is the permit for the individual applying, or can it be for like a company and then it works for anybody?
Typically, our population management hunts are for the public. And we utilize our public and give the public the opportunity to hunt those. But from my understanding, we've never done it, but we can issue it for a private farm. We tend to give the public the opportunity just because again, we talk about the North American model, and we try to use the public, as that resource. But I know, for example, was it the javelina hunt the first year we did that? We did a big outreach to the farms, and it was an over-the-counter permit, and we sold permits literally and tags to the farm and the farm staff. So they're the public, and so we had a farm buy a bunch of the tags, so they had them in their pocket for that farm.
He's just asking if they're transferable to the next guy. Small game.
What?
The small game permit. So, yeah, there's a couple different kind of levels, and you can see it causes a lot of confusion because it is very complicated. But for like the javelina, right? We've implemented a long-term solution that we think is viable for javelina. In the Walton Mohawk area, it's an expansion of that population. We don't want to expand javelina, the population into this area. It's not historically been here. And so what we've done is we've taken and implemented a year-round hunt that is over the counter. So any individual can purchase 2 javelina permits per year and hunt 365 days a year in that area and remove javelina. So I had a farm call last year. They said, I've got 4 javelina that are coming into my field. What can I do? I said, 2 individuals that are willing to hunt them, buy 4 permits, go kill that group of javelina and be done with it. That's how we implemented that solution. Obviously, with the river corridor, it's very thick in there. It's very hard to actually remove all of the individuals. But that worked for them. Versus deer, where that's historical habitat. That's a public resource that we want to continue to have on the landscape. And so we have some different strategies for that. For the small game permit, I'm not sure if we're going to go into that, but so if you're, I'm experiencing an issue with rabbits on my fields that I'm farming here, and so if you go, if a representative from the farm comes and gets the permit, they can go back and they can then have their farm hands implement that removal effort. So let's say you're having rabbits that you want removed. There's stipulations to it. You can't utilize that rabbit that are harvested or removed through that permit. But it's if the ranch manager gets the permit, he can have the ranch hands implement it. Was that your question?
Yeah, that special, the game and fish special permit for like cottontail rabbits, the small game permit, usually that's issued to the farm, okay? And it'll say it's issued to this farm, have it in hand, anybody who's authorized by that farm to be doing this activity, have a copy with them, and that's usually it's for the farm, okay? So if you have 10 farm hands you're having to do that, as long as they have copies of that, that typically suffices that permit, that entry.
And so, I guess our request is just that you let us know. So let's say you're having problems with rabbits, you say, okay, we're going to go out the next 3 nights, and we have the permit to spotlight and remove rabbits. Just let us know, because we're going to get those calls. Somebody's out spotlighting and shooting deer. Well, you guys aren't shooting deer, you're out trying to remove rabbits. If we know that, then that's good communication between us, and kind of alleviate some of that consternation. Getting up in the middle of the night, coming out and harassing guys that are trying to do what they're authorized to do. So.
Yeah, and the key is usually we get the most questions during the law section, right? Because nobody wants to get in trouble, but the key is you're working with us anyway. We're going to know. We're going to know that field has a special permit, and we authorize you guys to shoot at night with shotguns. So if we get that call, we're going to be like, we know that what that farm's doing, and it'll have a time frame, it'll have the species you're shooting. So we'll be working with you anyway, so we'll know. Okay, that's the key. So, any other questions so far? This is open question format, so if you want to ask questions, no problem.
So the permit is specific to the farm or just field?
Yeah, it's specific to, well, the permit is given to usually the farm, and then it'll designate the location. So if we determine it's this farm with 2 fields in these 2 different areas, we'll spell that out. project, just in my general observations from patrolling, I don't think they've affected the deer population at all, in my opinion. Dan, Mike?
Yeah, so, you know, we're continuing to adjust our management of the deer herd. So just a little bit of background, we started out with, was it 2015 that we implemented the first population management plan? And this is when the fencing first started going up. And so what has absolutely happened is that fences go up, that changes deer behavior. Because they're used to being in this area, an exclusion fence goes up, they have to change where they, how they use the landscape. And so absolutely that has changed deer behavior over the last 5 years. You know, where deer problems were before, they put up exclusionary fences, those deer create go to a new area and create different issues. So that has absolutely occurred. We've done, in 2015, we started with an any deer permit that was right before the general deer hunt. And we found that most of the hunters harvested bucks, which doesn't really affect the population, right? You need to remove the does to affect the population. So that didn't achieve what we were looking for. So we changed that strategy. We went to an antlerless hunt and used youth. And so we created a new hunt. You know, and these are the long-term ones. These are taking a year or two to implement each of these strategies. So we did a youth hunt where the youth had 7 or 10 days to harvest those. And so they removed, you know, part of the reproductive portion of that population, which has reduced that population somewhat. But again, that was a short window when they were exerting that pressure on the deer herd. So last year, what we implemented was actually during a 4-month period, an antlerless hunt that was a low-level antlerless hunt over those 4 months to kind of keep the pressure on that herd long-term, trying to change the deer behavior, change them wanting to be in the field. Because 5 years ago, you know, you would see deer out in the farm fields all day long, and we've certainly gotten it to the point where they're not out in the fields during the daylight hours. You're not seeing javelina out in the fields during daylight hours. They know that they're susceptible to hunting. And so what that does is increase the effectiveness of these other options that you have, right? So they're more susceptible to the noise cannons and the scarecrows and these other hazing techniques, right? You know, if you've got night watchmen that are out there chasing the deer off the field. So that's kind of how we've got to this point. But it's not, you know, what we need the farms to understand is that's not a long-term solution. This is a temporary solution as the farms are putting up their exclusionary fences to get to, you know, an acceptable level of intrusion. It's, again, if one intrusion is too many, the only viable solution for deer or javelina is to put up an exclusionary fence, because there's always going to be some out there.
One other thing worth pointing out, there's a lot of factors that go into how the deer population responds and what their behavior are, but rainfall is a huge one. And when we have really dry conditions in the desert, you're going to see a lot more deer in the ag. And is that an increased population? Well, for that area, maybe you see more deer, but the population as a whole, not necessarily. It's just moving around and concentrating in areas. So that's one of the things that Mike's getting at. As a larger herd, we have responsibility to manage that to the public. And so we don't want to drive that herd down to a level so that when conditions are good and they move back into the desert, we've basically impacted that desert herd. You know, we typically don't harvest female deer across the state for a reason, because it does impact the population to a pretty large degree. So our main goal is really just to apply that pressure over a longer period of time. It does help, in theory, with the hazing in combination with exclusionary fencing, and to make all those other measures a little bit more effective in that messy end role here.
And you talk about how did it affect the deer population. So the answer is yes and no. So yes, it's probably affected that local population, but that's only a subpopulation of the whole area because they feed in from other areas. And we know the population is still stable because we survey the deer population and do population estimates every 2 years. So we know that the overall deer population in this area is pretty stable still. If that answers your question. Okay. Good conversation, though, very important. So yeah, talking about the regional measures under that law, 17239, it's just kind of from the bottom up, right? So we want to start with some of the simple things. Exclusion fencing, right? Or exclusion measures, and deterrence, right? So sound, light, things like that. And we're just going to move up to these higher level things. Aggressive deterrence and non-lethal stuff, right? So under that law, you're allowed to do these things. And then lethal removal. Under that law, you can kill certain animals, right? You just can't kill those game mammals or the game birds, right? Or things protected by federal law. So you can actually harvest and kill certain game species under that 17239 law without a special permit, okay? Work with us. Things that aren't considered game mammals, you can. For example, coyotes, bobcats aren't game animals. They're predator fur bearers. So just get with us on the species and we'll let you know what the law covers, what they can kill and what they can't. Okay, so we talk about definitions and that's where it gets in the weeds for a lot of people. A cottontail rabbit is a game mammal, but a jackrabbit's not. So you can kill a jackrabbit, but not a cottontail. So the key is, let's see what you got out there, and we'll see where it fits into the law and what you can do. I guess that's the main purpose of this slide right there with the asterisk, okay? And then if you have to lethally remove things that are game animals, for example, deer that aren't covered under this, we're going to look into these other options, right? Special permits, population management hunts for these things, okay? Again, we talk about varies with species, what reasonable measures you will take and implement under this law. It depends, like we've been talking about. If it's birds versus coyotes, versus any other species deer, is what we'll work with you with and see what has worked, what the research says works, and we'll try all these things. And we've kind of covered all these. It's all things we've talked about, all these other reasonable measures, but these are the things we talked about that we need to try before we kind of go up to the higher level of lethally taking, if it is a game species, the lethal taking these things. And it's just things we've already talked about. One other thing I want to talk about reasonable measures too. So if you're having the issue during a legal hunting season, right? So we just had a deer hunting season right now. You can utilize the hunting public or yourself as a legal hunter and draw a hunting tag, and that's totally fine, right? Because you have a legal hunting tag, and you can take care of that problem that way, or allow hunters to hunt your portion of the land if there's a legal hunting season, and they have the license or the permit to do it, right? So that's another lawful exemption, right, as a legal hunter. So if you have a species that's a huntable species that hunters can solve the problem for you, that's totally allowed, right? So something to think about. But it's usually seasonal, right? So we have certain hunts that are seasonal. Rabbits, for example, are year-round. So if you have problems with rabbits, a bunch of you could get hunting licenses, and as long as you follow the legal methods and takes and the bag limits, you can hunt rabbits pretty much year-round. So that can solve your problem. So it just depends on the species. Get with us, and we'll let you know kind of what the options are. You guys confused yet on the laws, or it's a little clearer now? Okay, I see some nods. I think it's, it always gets in the weeds, the laws, right? Nobody wants to get in trouble, but working with us, we'll work it through it. But there's a lot of things under the law that we can do, at least for lethal take, if you're having these habitual animals that are coming in. And so that's the key message right here is just get with us. You're going to get with us anyway, and we're going to document the problem. And we're going to see what methods you took. And again, that's important too, because if we go up the chain a little bit and we decide to lethally take, let's say, some game animals like the deer, the javelina, we want to document that we've tried everything else, right? So we've tried, the bait piles or the food piles, fencing, and it's just not working, right? So if we have that all documented, we can go up the chain and implement these other measures, okay? So that's the key, right? And so we talk about, so if you've taken these preventable measures under 17-239, it's just not working. Again, we talked about this permit. So we can authorize some take that's not allowed under that general law, right? And we talked about the small game depredation permit kind of in length. But pretty much that's a pretty easy one, and that's for small game animals. And there's a definition for that, but mostly like your rabbits, things like quail, things like that. Those are small game animals and small game birds. Even dove. We'll get into dove in a little bit, but that's also federally protected, but it's a huntable species. So anyways, if it's a small game species, that's where you can do something locally with our office. Pretty fast turnaround, like somebody we were talking about. It's something that's in our office here, literally down the road at our game and fish office. We go out there, see what the issue was, what measures you took, and we can issue a special permit, small game depredation permit, okay? Very simple, it lays out the farm, the fields, the method of take. Again, like we talked about, maybe it's rabbits, maybe an effective method is to take them at night with a shotgun and spotlighting them. We can circumvent some laws by allowing these exclusions in this permit. It allows you to do some extra things that the general law doesn't allow you to do, okay? And so that could be effective.
For the animals that are within a hunting season,
Mhm.
do the limits still apply? Or are you allowed to go over the limit technically doesn't?
So yeah, so if you're gonna use it under the hunting exemption of the law, you would still have to apply hunting bag limits. Good question though.
But you could grant permission to someone else to come help you.
Same thing, they would have to apply.
It would, each person gets.
Yeah, so if you invited
It's
10
not a
friends-
limit between yourselves, it's,
Correct.
okay.
Yeah, so if you invited 10 friends to come up, well, let's use deer for example. If you invited 10 friends with their deer tags to come hunt, they'd still have to do one per calendar year. Good question though.
So with an exemption, you can bag too, if you got drawn on tag number, the exemption.
So each species has a bag limit and a timeline when that bag limit can be accomplished. For deer, it's usually one per year. Javelina, though, we have, that's one where we... No, because we're talking about the game species, right? So that's why, under that one. Okay.
So if you got a deer tag, and you got the depredation tag, and you have successfully taken a deer, you can't go out and get another one on depredation?
It's just one per person per year. Yeah. And that's what happens a lot, just talking about general hunting 101. Hunters will get a thing called an archery deer tag, and they'll get a rifle draw tag, right? So then you're allowed to get two, but you can only successfully harvest one per deer, for example. Only one per year, so the other tag is rendered useless. You can't harvest another one. Okay. So we have bag limits for things if you're going to use it for hunting.
But I think maybe a little clarification too is, are you doing the removal under like legal hunting, which, you know, if you're following the rules, you can do it any time within the season, or are you doing it under 239, the depredation law? So for rabbits, for
I was
instance,
mostly referring
so-
to like rabbits,
okay.
So there-
type thing,
right.
not big game.
right, it's 10, you know, the bag limit is 10 per day if you're doing it through hunting. So you have to do it during daylight hours, legal method of take, and you have to stay within that bag limit. If you come in and get a special permit to remove rabbits, you go out, let's say, you know, at night with a spotlight with a shotgun shot, you can remove more than 10 in a
Right.
day. So those are what the,
That's what I was.
it's two
Apologize.
different kind of, you know, avenues you can go down, depending on which one it is. So if it's, you know, if it's the deer season, you know, obviously it would have to be a tag holder.
Yeah.
Somebody that already has a tag to hunt would be able to hunt.
But like for animals that don't need a tag, just a license, you're allowed to do your daily limit, just normal hunting season, and then the limit under the depredation law as well.
Yeah, for example.
So you can technically do 20 a day if you're.
So for example, a lot of those, so for
Well,
example,
like for rabbits, if it was under the depredation permit, there wouldn't be a limit, so you could remove 100 in a day. So that's where those are. Let's say for quail, you know, under the depredation permit, you can trap quail and remove them. Well, there's not a limit on it versus if you're going to do it during hunting season, you know, with the hunting license, it would be 50 per day with, you know, shotgun shooting shot.
But they both can overlap, correct?
Yeah,
Sure.
that's what I'm getting at.
Right.
Yeah, so you could do both, but again, you gotta be real careful with that, because the special permit will allow you to do some extra things. And so, you just gotta keep those two separate and realize that. So for hunting quail,
They're two different avenues.
I just
So-
don't wanna get in trouble because
Yep.
I've shot way too many pigeons in one dead air.
So that's why you need to talk to us individually on what you're doing, because for pigeons, there's not a limit. You know, so there, you know, you can address that differently than you would dove, which would be different than quail. We just need to know kind of specifically where you're going and what you're doing.
So, good questions, yeah, the laws really do confuse, there's a lot, because you're mixing hunting laws and depredation laws, and it gets really confusing. But the key is just get with us, and we'll line you out on each specific species, because it gets a little overwhelming. He's talking about deer and game stuff and this and that, but pretty much get with us individually on the specific animal. We'll lay you out to where you know exactly where you're at, okay? And also, by the way, I put some hunting regulations over there.
I think
And so
they're
grab
green.
some of those.
Grab them.
Who?
I think people are.
They're gone. Okay, great, awesome. So that's a good starting, that's your kind of starting base Bible for Hunting 101. It has most of our seasons that would deal with you guys, but that can at least give you a mechanism, and you'll know the time limits and seasons if you're going to use that as a method as well, okay? So we talked about these, some other things that we can initiate, and Dan is going to go over some of the things that are on these slides that we've utilized once people have used those reasonable measures and it wasn't working. He's going to go over some of these other things. And we talked about lethal removal of some other species like we were talking about just about right now. Okay. So here's a copy of that small game depredation permit we were talking about. It's very simple. It's a one-page, I think it's only one page, and literally it's the name of the person or the farm, the species the permit's valid for, okay, and special restrictions and allowances. So that's where it's going to say this farm for cottontail rabbits, unlimited for this season, for the whole calendar year, or whatever we decide might work for you, all right? That's what's nice about this permit. We can set the parameters however we need to address your situation. And special restrictions and allowances, that's really cool because hunting rabbits can be challenging. You know, under normal hunting, you're not allowed to hunt at night, but these things they come out and eat at your fields at night, and using a spotlight's really easy to freeze them and lethally take them if that's effective. And that's where we can put in those special restrictions that allow you to do things the regular law doesn't allow you to do, okay? So that's what it looks like. Again, fee none. I forgot if we had a fee, but it's none, so it's free. So you can't beat that. These are underutilized. I would say we don't get a lot of people coming into our office for these, but it's there, it's free, and it doesn't take that much time, okay?
So you think you could get that run through in a 24-hour period?
I think we could. I think we could, yeah. If we,
Because you know where we're at.
yeah. In a lot of these, we've gotten these for, most common ones I've seen is for like cottontail rabbits. And I've seen it like the cottontail rabbits are chewing irrigation drip lines, let's say, or poly lines in some kind of field, right? Maybe it's orange orchard or something. And I've gone out there real fast and you can literally see the chew marks, and they've had some kind of rabbit fencing up, and they've taken some measures, right? So that could be really quick. Like this guy's got the rabbit fencing and he's got damage. What else is there to do? And we can get this knocked out pretty quick. Okay.
Hey, Richard?
Yeah.
Where you going? Does the farm have to identify the hunters that are going to be hunting, and do they have to be employees, and can they keep the meat after they shoot it?
Right, so good question. So generally this permit will say the farm, and as long as you have the permit with you, that's usually what we say on this one is like whoever's going to do the activity, have a copy of this with them. And then Dan mentioned, can I keep the dead animals, right? I don't want them to go to waste. The answer, unfortunately, is no under depredation permit. You have to leave it lay, but we're talking about pathogens. You probably don't want to leave it lay in the field. So you can remove it, but you're not supposed to keep it. You can give it back to us, or we can remove it. But yeah, that's the one caveat about that exception, is that you're not allowed to keep it. The meat.
So what we find, the questions are, people are trying to skirt what you can and can't do. So, like during legal trapping season on private land, if you've got a trapper that approaches you and says, hey, I'm looking for places to trap coyotes, will you let me on your property? That's a great example of allowing a trapper during the trapping season to remove those animals. And they're going to trap them, and they're going to keep the fur, right? That's why they're out there trapping. They want the coyotes and the bobcats, they want the fur from them. Well, trapping season closes, and you still have crops out in the field, and you want to continue trapping, so you can come in and get a permit to do that outside of the legal trapping season, but the trapper has to understand that they can no longer keep that fur.
Where do we relocate it to?
What's that?
It's a relocation, correct? We're not gonna use that?
Well, for like coyotes and bobcats, that would be a lethal removal.
Oh, okay.
Because they're not going to, be able to take that animal far enough away to not have it come back into that same area. But again, then they can't use that fur if that's what they're after. Or rabbits, if they want to remove it through the depredation, they can't take those rabbits home and eat them. If they want to do it during the, under the licensed hunter during daylight hours, that type of thing, then they'd have to just have this.
Okay, so you're not allowed to keep it, but for food safety reasons, we have to remove it. So do we have to like call you and
Just-
select it, or can we like graveyard express it?
Yeah, just let us know. I mean, if you've got, on the edge of the field, you've got desert that you can take and bury it, then we're not gonna hear about it. But, if you remove 100 rabbits at night and then dump them out in the desert, we're gonna get a call on it the next day, right? Somebody killed all these animals and dumped them out here in their sleeping place. So just use a little bit of,
100 rabbits in a day. I just talked about like a bag limit type number for birds. You've got 10 doves sitting there. Can't technically use it. Do we just graveyard express it, or do we have to call you guys?
no, if we know the activity is occurring and you can address it, that's fine. But again, let's say you kill 100 blackbirds, just let it, if you can't bury them, you have to dump them out somewhere.
All the law,
Let us know.
all the law typically says is just you can't retain the carcass. So as far as getting rid of the carcass, yeah, we encourage that. So we want you to bury it or destroy it, that's fine, or we can do it. And if it's something that we can give it a charitable organization, most likely not. But if we can, we will try. So just one last slide, and then we'll take a 5-minute break so we can change out our camera, SD card, or the storage device. We'll do a little bit more presentation. Dan's going to cover some of the success stories over the last 5 years, or lessons learned. And then we didn't really cover birds, but we're going to cover birds after him, and some of the, the bird species and the laws and exemptions with birds. Okay, that's a whole nother discussion. But if we want to take a 5-minute break, and we'll change out some stuff, take the bathroom there. So we can fit everything in, but I just wanted to come back to this slide. There was quite a few questions on this small game depredation permit. I just wanted to clarify again. I kind of think I did, but I just wanted to clear it up. So this is the one for small game, and you talked about, can I get one in 24 hours? So this one still, you get this, we can issue this if you've taken the reasonable measures that we talked about, okay? So it can happen fairly quickly, but we still have to go out and do a site visit on your field and demonstrate that you have depredation and that you've taken some measures, right? Rabbits can be very simple. It could be you have some damage on some dripper lines, for example, and you had tried some fencing, right? Or you guys tried some hazing techniques. It can be just as simple as that, and you've demonstrated that. We come back and tell our staff, say, yeah, they've tried measures. Let's go ahead and issue that, okay? So I just want to clarify that we still got to take those measures and try some preventative measures first and document that problem. Okay, does anybody have any other questions on that permit? Okay.
So basically, there should be some conversation leading up to the point where you're gonna come in and actually try to get a depredation permit. We should have some conversations ahead of time, try some measures ahead of time before you get to that point.
Perfect. All right, cool. So we're going to transition. Dan is going to introduce himself again, and he's going to cover some of these past experiences since our last workshop in 2015, where it really kicked off with trying some of this stuff. Where reasonable measures haven't worked on some places out east of Yuma here, and we've gotten up the chain and tried some of these other things we've talked about. Okay, and he'll talk about some success stories, lessons learned, and things that might have not worked. And he's got the floor. The right arrow.
Okay. Hello. So I'm Dan Orquidez, and I'm here to share with you some of our successes and lessons learned. And a little background about me. In 1992, I came to Arizona Game and Fish, and I was assigned the Gila Bend District in '93, and had been there for like 18 years. And so I worked a lot with a lot of the farms around Paloma, and their biggest issues were with, you know, deer and javelina, but they only had mostly alfalfa and cotton and Sudan. And so one of the things that I learned from them all was that they learned to be tolerant. In working with them over 18 years, you know, we shared some ideas, but we didn't get to the point where we get to in the Welton Valley and Mohawk Valley as we have today. So just to tell you about when I got here into the district in 2010, you know, there was a bunch of rumbling about javelina that they came out of nowhere, it seemed like. And next thing you know, by 2012, implementing all those different measures that everybody was talking about, they just weren't getting a handle on it. And here's in this picture are two javelina running through a field up by Texas Hill, taken by Donald Pelfrey. And I like this picture because that's what you basically saw when you drove up, right? The tail end running back into the river. So we implemented a population management hunt. We started it out slow. We always kind of do these things so slow, methodical speed, because we don't want to overreact. And so we had like these small hunts, just like we're doing with the deer right now, where we're staggering it over a period of time. And then next thing you know, we finally, you know, just said, hey, you know what? We'll just hunt them for a minimal population. If we end up killing them all in the river in this particular area, then that's what's going to be our goal. And so it started out, if you look here up on this map below, if you can see it, it went just past Texas Hill a short distance, okay? And then you weren't getting any calls. And, you know, Mike mentioned he got a call last year for 4 javelina, but I heard of one this year over in the melon field by the Growler Pond. But for the most part, we weren't getting very many calls, so we thinking we got this beat right. Then all of a sudden, about 3 years ago, we started getting these calls further down the river. And we ended up that this community was growing their own vegetables. And so it turned out that they were really getting in there, hitting them hard, and they were putting up fences, they were throwing water balloons, putting cayenne pepper and crushed peppers, and they weren't about shooting. They didn't want to have these animals killed. At least they started out that way. And then we got to where we said, we got enough pressure, and I said, oh, we'll try to do relocation. Well, I tell you what, the relocation with javelina is intense as far as time and resources. So we ended up removing, I believe, around 9 adult javelinas and 2 babies, and that was a kind of a circus. And then finally, you know, the calls kept coming, and somebody got promoted and still got a call and said to me, you're not doing enough. And I'm like, holy cow. So I'm saying, okay. I go to Mike and I says, let's go shoot them at night. And we ended up lethally removing one because somebody missed. And
That's on my eye.
But what ended up eventually happening is that we extended the population area out to the Sentinel on Agua Caliente Road and south of the YPG And it's got a kind of a quirky tail on the end, but you see where it said the Hydo Road, or the Paloma Road, you might know it as. So we did extend it out to include this area where these people were growing their own vegetables. And I think it was a success story because, you know, we weren't getting nearly the number of calls we were in the past. And right now, people ask me, where can you find javelina? Growler Pond's a good place to start. 47 and Avenue 47 in the river's a good spot. 22, Avenue 22 in the river's a good spot to look. But otherwise, you'd be hard pressed to find. So if you guys have more information out there, do share with, you know, Yossi, Mike, and Richard, so that they can share that with hunters, so that we can continue this goal.
One thing about javelina, just to clarify, the reason why we were comfortable with driving that population down is because it's really non-traditional javelina habitat. Yeah, they've probably always been present in the Gila River corridor, but now that that is primarily agriculture, the river no longer flows like it used to, the adjoining areas, that's really not javelina habitat. And so we're comfortable with saying, you know, this is really not an area where they need to be. They do continue to come down the river. They probably will continue. But as far as the amount of pressure, hunt pressure, we're willing to provide there, much different than deer. So I just want to separate the two. We're looking at those two species very differently.
Right. You saw they were coming from the east, so they decided to follow me. Over here, the deer population management hunt. So this picture here, by the way, was taken over in Hyder, but not too far away. It was taken by Tommy Conde, and that's a pretty impressive picture of a lot of bucks and deer in there, right? So how did this all start? About 2012, same time frame, Scott Fisher was working with Harrison Farms out by Mitri Lake, and that's the area that's in this map right now, where he was having to deal with deer coming into the lettuce. And so working with Amanda Brooks, she started out with a 4-foot fence, electric fence, 6-foot fence, and finally ended up with an 8-foot fence. And then we came in and we did a population management hunt, archery only, correct? It was archery only because we were concerned because it was such a highly populated area, right? So what ended up happening is she put in cattle guards too, and she, matter of fact, put them in triple deep. So she was out to 21 feet. And she said that she had her farm hands tell her that they were still jumping, you know, that distance. And we're like, wow, that's pretty incredible. But I'll tell you some more about that later. Then over here now, back over in the Welton Mohawk area, we had all these farmers that were also practicing all these silhouettes, scarecrows, hazers, you know, cannon poppers, what have you. And they weren't having much success keeping the deer out. So as Mike had alluded to earlier, we did this any hunt. Well, why we did an any deer hunt was because we didn't think we were going to get enough participation, because most people just don't like to shoot a doe. And we were also under a real tight time restraint to get this to happen really fast. And so what it ended up happening was we got it approved for 40 tags, and it got really popular because somebody killed a boomer buck, and it went viral, and it turned into a trophy hunt. So early we were encouraging people just to shoot a doe. You know, all of a sudden people were wanting to shoot antlers. And we took a lot of heat, the department did, because the hunters that had the tag for the general season right after this hunt, you know, they were calling us and telling me, for example, hey, this so-and-so, he shot my buck. And I'm like, whoa. But not just that, but, you know, a bunch of big bucks were taken, and so the general deer population, the general deer hunters, they were like, oh, you just stole this from me, you know, you robbed us. And so we even had the regional supervisor go to the Yuma Valley Rod and Gun Club and tell them so. or tell them, you know, that we're apologized, we didn't put it in the paper, we didn't get enough notice out, and, you know, hey, we're gonna do this differently. And actually, the club was the one that kind of pushed the youth thing that, you know, we did for 2 years, and we had great success. So on the first hunt, in the any deer hunt, our hunt success was over 80%. Our first youth hunt was over 80%. And that was, the youth hunt was only does only, by the way. And when we're dealing with youth, we had a couple of issues. Picking a season, it had to be a holiday. It had to be a day off for the kids. It also had to be where it wasn't so too warm, it wasn't hot. And the other thing too was that, oh shoot, I'm gonna try to remember.
Retired guy, probably.
Yeah, there you go, I'm retired. But there was other issues about incorporating the kids in the hunt. So then, after 2 years, we decided to go to this longevity where now we have a hunt over a period of 4 months. And it goes into the second season of your growing season, and not the initial one back in August, because again, it's too hot.
And it's different, the youth hunt was a hard scheduled hunt, so it was automatically in the regulations, 2 years in a row, it would just come out and happen. The hunts that we have now are on the books as something that we can activate on an as-needed basis. So the last 2 years, we've had hunts, whether we do or not going forward, it just depends on the conditions, depends on what the deer are doing, how necessary we think it is.
And by the way, when we did that first hunt in 2015, one farmer had gone out and he said, hey, I counted 55 deer in my field. And after get this, after the any deer hunt where we killed 36 deer, plus all the deer that were killed during the general season, that same farmer went out and said, now I got 60 deer. So we were like, oh, okay. So, all right, so I wanted to talk a little bit about fences. And if you have not driven through the Dome Valley, Welton, Mohawk area recently, I mean, I'm telling you, the place has changed. So you see all these 8-foot fences. So imagine a farmer next door to someone who has an 8-foot fence is now going to receive a bunch of deer, right? And that's the motivation, basically, for some of these farmers is to build up these 8-foot fences. Lessons learned from when, you know, Amanda had put up all those different fences. And so, again, the Game and Fish mission, as you've heard over and over again, is to encourage the 8-foot fence with the wire mesh. If you look over here, that scale on the right is a variable mesh. So you want to have it small on the bottom for the rabbits and then work its way up larger. And you can buy that kind of fencing out there, and you'll see it out there. And so you can kind of like do double duty, keeping the small animals out as well as your deer. So we mentioned keeping your fence closed, as far as don't put a 3-sided fence up. And so I tell you what, somebody did, and the open side was towards the Gila River. And I was like, oh, what were you thinking? And then the comment was, well, they told me you were going to come from the desert. And I go, well, I says, I drove by here 11 o'clock at night and see 18 deer in your field, and your hazer just sitting in the car. And I asked him, I says, hey, I said, what's going on over here? And he said, mucho bananas. You know, it only takes one animal, unfortunately, to ruin you guys' day, right? You know, over on 29, they had electric fence up. Coyote got inside and couldn't find his way out. So he ran all through the field, and I understood that the disking and reseeding was going to cost around $72,000. I said, like, wow, that's a lot of money. So trying to do this right is go to the 8-foot fence, all right? That's what I recommend, and that's what I've been recommending for a long time. Now, can a deer jump an 8-foot fence? Well, under the right motivation, sure it can, you know? And the one example that was described to me was a coyote was hot on the tail of about 5 deer, and most of the deer just crashed right into the fence, but he claims that one of them cleared the 8-foot fence. And I said, man, I would have loved to see that. That would be an amazing feat. I actually know a person, she was pregnant and lifted a car up off her husband's chest so he could crawl out. So under the right motivation, you know, these animals can make, you know, that exception. And going back to that 21-foot jump over the cattle guard, I think there was other circumstances involved there, that normal deer aren't going to jump that far on purpose. You guys have another challenge. Your neighbors that are the Welt Mohawk Irrigation District and your public works, they have concerns themselves, whether they can reach a canal to clean it out, the dredge it, right? The other concern is with public works is they have a right of way. They don't want the fences to deter traffic going down the road. And so if you're in that situation, you know, you gotta work with public works or you gotta work with the Welt Mohawk Irrigation District. But you know what? I've seen it done. Next Generation down on 30th Avenue, or Avenue 30, you know, they worked with them and they actually were able to put a smaller fence along the canal and make it work for them. I know that Next Generation also got with the Public Works over there by, I don't remember the name of the field, but over by where Cullison lives. And they had been able to put up fences temporarily there. Amanda Brooks, by the way, when she had that operation going on at Mitri Lake, she made panels out of her fence. So she moved it all the way out into the Welton area where her brother manages, Blake manages that other farm. So prefabricated panels. For those that have to move fence because they're on temporary leases, okay? Now, cattle guards. I know you guys want to impede your operations, so we talk about cattle guards. And if you look at these two, you'll see that the one on the right has a fence that runs along the side of the edge of the cattle guard, which is a good idea. But if you were at this cattle guard, the depth is only about 5 inches, maybe 8 inches at the most. And so the deer can just walk right through the rails. But if you look at the one on the left, you see the depth is closer to about 20 inches. So that it creates a more challenging barrier to the deer to step through the cattle guard. If you go, I believe it's Avenue 46 Bridge, they did a cattle guard there, and it's pretty deep. It's probably about maybe 2 to 3 feet deep. And the deer that have gone through there, you can look at the cattle guard and you can see scrapes of fur hair and stuff. But as far as I've heard, I haven't seen one that's broken its leg, what have you, but you want to be careful there. And in your booklets, I asked Vicki to include a study that was done by the USDA. They actually have a wildlife damage division. And they came out and did a really interesting study at an airport. And they were in an area where they were dealing with potentially 2,000 deer. So it's pretty interesting. We don't have that density out here in the Welton and Mohawk area. So take time to read that, by the way. And you'll see that in that study, they reduce their access to the airport by over 80% to 90%. Can you imagine? Just by putting up a cattle guard. I mean, they still have their 8-foot fence, all right? And they have their 8-foot fence along the sides of the cattle guard as well. So, here's my last slide. Anybody have any questions on the slides I just presented? Okay. The escape route, all right? So if you take a look at the picture on the left, there's about 14 deer inside the fence of an 8-foot fence enclosure. You might not be able to see them, but they're up in the upper corner. They're up against the fence line. These are two farms working together, by the way. They had at least 30 people in the field that day, and the farm managers communicated with the other one and said, get our people over here. And imagine 30 people are coming into these deer, okay? And they're spread out about maybe from here to the wall. I'm on the outside watching this, and I yell out to the farm manager, I said, you need to cut the corner fence. So he's got a grinder, and he can hear the grinder going, and he's trying to break down that fence so he can get them out. All right. What happened was that group of deer saw all these people coming at them, and the grinder, right? Well, fat chance they were going to go that direction, and so they ran through the people, through the fields. It was crazy. It took them an hour to get them out of that enclosure. You imagine they were pretty tired too. In fact, I'll tell you how tired they could have been, because I watched deer going through the furrows as they were jumping through them, and 2 fawns just dropped where they were out of exhaustion. Because I picked up one and I put him in the bed of the truck, and I told my volunteer, he goes, watch him, make sure he doesn't go anywhere. He jumped out of the truck. Over here, this other escape route idea. And I give credit to Amanda Brooks, because she said, well, you put up these big old hay bales, right? And so that they have a way to jump out over the fence from the inside. The only 2 things I recommend if you do that is you put them on a corner, or you put them in a boxed-in area. If you look at this, you can see that it's like an extension of the fence, so that if you're driving deer there, you can kind of force them to use the hay bales to exit the fence enclosure. I haven't seen anybody document it actually works yet, but I imagine it's there, and it's feasible, and it seems reasonable that deer could use that in a pinch if given the right motivation. And one of the farms that was going to put up a fence calls me up and says, I got about 30 deer in my cotton field, but we're going to put up an 8-foot fence. And I think to myself, okay, well, it turns out, you know, that whole thing about doing this before they're, habitual to it. Well, he's trying to get 30 deer out of their resting area, basically, to leave so he can put up his fence. It took him over a week just to move 30 deer out of there as he's putting up his fence. A week. All right, so my thing to you again is do it before it starts, to give them a reason to come in. Let's see here. All right, so if nobody has any questions, then I'm going to head it back off to Richard. Any questions? Thank you for having me. Okay.
Well, really for anybody, but it's just on the cattle guards, because we've got, obviously have some called the burros over in Mars. They, keep them out too, or, because you always hear, they're church and whatever else. And so I'm thinking, that can really.
Well, if you take a look at that study, they said PVC rolls, but I mean, obviously you wanted to be strong enough to deal the weight of a tractor or what have you that goes across it. But if you want, you go out here to Avenue 30 and take a look at Next Generation's, access points.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, right. I guess they changed the name when I see the names changed.
Yeah, Next Gen,
Yeah, Next Gen. But I recommend you guys just drive out there and look at different ideas. Some of them have closing gates on their cattle guards that just swing. Some have them slide. Some of them have access points for the irrigator so that he can just be the only person to come through a gate and close it behind him for like an individual.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of good ideas out there if you guys drive around and take a look. And 30, yeah, Avenue 30 in the Welton area. Yeah, for sure.
So can horses and burros will react to a cattle guard the same way as
I would
deer and
assume
cattle
so,
do?
because they were initially put up for cattle. And so, you know, the brochure, the studies tells you, you know, the spacing's about 5 inches between each of the rails.
And just be aware that the vast majority of the problems are right after the fence goes up, again, because those animals are habituated, and so they're going to be testing and trying to get through that barrier, versus once it's been there and established, that just kind of goes away. You know, once the fence has been there, it's very rare for new animals to come in or, you know, cause problems in the future. It's just kind of that learning process. It can be pretty painful for a little bit.
Yeah, just to add to what Mike said about habitual patterns, they put up a new fence, I think it was out of Avenue 46, and I was getting calls and says, hey, got another dead deer by the fence, because they were coming in and hitting it, so they broke their necks. And at least 5 or 6 deer were killed, just, you know, by, you know, learning the hard way.
So yeah, I really appreciate Dan coming in and taking his time to come in and talk about that, because a lot of this stuff we've implemented was in his old district, and it's been empty for a while. So to have that legacy since 2015 of things we've tried, it was really good for Dan to cover that. And then we do have some active hunts right now, again, some measures out there that you guys can take part in. And I wanted to cover that for the javelina, for example, if you're having that issue, we do have those tags available and they're over the counter. So if you guys don't know how, if you're not a hunter, how that works is you can legally take some of these javelina by buying a hunting license and buying one of these tags at our game and fish office. Okay. You can buy 2 of them. So that's something that's in the books right now that you can take. If you have javelina that are causing a problem, again, there's a limit, obviously, because it's under the hunting season, and you have to have a tag, but you don't have to put in for a draw process. You literally just go to Game and Fish, buy at least a hunting license and that tag, which is about $15 or something. But anyways, if you have some problem with javelina, that's a way that you can take care of it today, okay? And then maybe Mike can give an update on one of the population management hunts for the deer that we have and where that's
Are we doing that? I can just.
We don't have a slide for it.
So, last year what we did is we had the general hunt, basically the first 2 weeks of November. The second 2 weeks of November, we implemented a 15 tag antler deer hunt. And then we had in December 25 tags, January 20 tags, and February 20 tags. So that was the 4, you know, to coincide with the leafy green growing season. This is again the Walton Valley. So basically from 95 out to 57, between 8 and YPG. So that's the hunt area. And during that time, we harvested 14 deer with those 80 tags, and the statistics on it took 30 days to harvest each deer. So that was the amount of pressure out there between the 80 hunters that went out to kill those 14 deer. And as Mike alluded to earlier, that population that's found within the agriculture is very dependent on conditions out in the desert. So 2 years ago, when we had the E. coli outbreak, it was an extremely dry winter. There was nothing growing out in the desert, and those deer were just piled up in the agriculture. This is before we had the population management. Last year, when we implemented the population management hunt, it was extremely wet monsoon into winter. The desert conditions were really good, and those deer really moved out of the agriculture. So that's why we had, you know, kind of such low hunt success. But it worked out really well because we impacted the deer that were living in the Gila River Valley, the kind of the resident deer, not the ones that go back and forth between the ag and the desert. And so this year, conditions again are different. It's a little bit drier than last year, but conditions aren't horrible. There are more deer in the agriculture than last year. And we just started a 20 tag hunt that is beginning today, and then it's going to go through the end of December for this 5-6 week period. We'll have 20 hunters out there with for antlerless tag, for antlerless deer. And then we will evaluate how that's going. What we need from the growers is to know what they're seeing out there. Are there problem areas that are experiencing lots of depredation? And then as a department, we will evaluate whether we want to continue that into January and February. That's the option we have. And so again, this is kind of adaptive management at its kind of finest scale for us that we have. But we want to make sure that we're implementing it and achieving the desired outcome. And again, something that the growers need to understand is that this is not a long-term solution. You know, this is a deer herd that we want to maintain for the public. Unlike the javelina that we're willing to have a kind of minimum population out there, the deer, we want to have that population out there. And so it's to give the growers the time to implement these other measures, right, to get those fences up into those problem areas. And again, as these fences go up, that problem, it you know, moves, right? If the deer in this spot, they can't no longer access it. But that's where we're at. So we are going to implement 20 tags starting today, going through the end of the year, and we have the ability to put in some in January and February.
Excuse me, are they growing tags or what are they counting?
This is the depth or the hunter pool population. It's called a population management. So we have several different options for us. So this is outside of the general.
So they put you on a list and you call out.
So yes, what a hunter can do is in the regulations. It's called the hunter pool, and it's for the application fee. I think it's $13 for a resident, $15 for a non-resident. You can fill it out, send it in to us, and you will be entered into the hunter pool. And so it's a pool of hunters that are available for those kinds of tags. And basically, the way we handle it, it's a very quick turnaround. And so I would call you up if you're in the hunter pool, and I'd say, you know, we have this hunt and this tag available. You have 48 hours to get back with us and let us know if you want that tag. And if you don't get back, if you're out of town and you don't get that message, we go on to the next person. And until we get those, you know, for us, for the 20 tags, until we get those 20 tags allocated, we're going to just keep moving down the line.
So are you building by this pool now? The pool?
Yeah, and and what we found last year was, I think the vast majority of people are putting into the hunter pool and they apply for a tag for that year. So, you know, once the elk and antelope draw goes out, I think a lot of people apply for it. So what we found was that in November and December of last year, we had a lot of the applicants that got picked for the tags were not local. They weren't locals that were around here. You know, they come from anywhere from around the state. Well, we put the word out last year, and so to put in for the next year, because it's per calendar year, so starting January 1 through December 31. So December 31, that whole hunter pool gets, you know, that's done, and we're starting a new one. And so we had a lot of locals because we'd gotten the word out that we were going to do this doe hunt in January and February. And so that's when we saw really a lot of the local hunters that were spending a extended period of time out there. You know, a lot of these hunters were spending, you know, 15, 21, even up to 28 days out of the month that they were out there looking for deer. But yeah, just in any of the regulations, it's one, you just cut it out and physically send it in, or if you come by the office, we'll inter-office mail it up to you. And the application is per calendar year, so until the next regulations come out for the previous year, so just scratch out 2019 for 2020 if you want to apply for it, or if you got somebody that wants to apply for it.
So the pool is full right now, but if it gets extended to January or February, does the pool reset? People
Yep.
who apply starting January 1?
Yep.
Okay.
And so that's what, if you let people know that you know that are local that like to hunt, it's a good opportunity for them to apply and get a tag, because they're not competing against kind of the vast majority of the state of hunters that generally put in for this hunter pool, because most people haven't put in until the drop apart. So the application for the help me on that answer real quick.
Yeah, no, that was good. Yeah, it ties into what Dan presented, and there are some things you can do right now. So again, you can always get with our local office, and they can get you situated. You know, if you do want to get a javelina tag and try that option at your farm or wherever, or getting more information about the population management hunts and how that process works. So we're lucky. Office is literally just down the road. So good for questions and spend time on that. So I'm going to kind of burn through this stuff. I want to get done by noon. And this is good. We're having the question and answer session now, which is totally fine. And it's good. It's relevant when we're talking about the topics. So this is the second part I want to talk about. So we talk about the depredation, or the reasonable measures under the state law. It doesn't include species protected, bird species, species protected by federal law. Okay, so that's what this kind of quick presentation part will be about, is bird depredation, right? So I'm taking reasonable measures, and those aren't working. And if I want to lethally take bird species, what's the laws, right? So I want to kill a bird. All birds, most of the birds we have flying in the air out here are protected under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, under the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service, okay? Federally, okay? Not under state. So the Federal Fish and Wildlife, very old act, 1918, protects everything that flies in the air because it's something that moves around, right? So it's wildlife species held under the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So when we talk about bird depredation, we have to go through that channel if we want to lethally take them, right? So there are some exemptions, and we'll cover that real quick. So the law does allow you to take the reasonable measures that we talked about. That's non-lethal, right? So you can still do the hazing techniques on most bird species, but now if those aren't working, for example, for game and fish, if it's game animals, right? So we talk about the deer and stuff, we can do some stuff. We have that small game depredation permit, which is that one-page thing that's pretty quick. Now, if it's involving birds, now we have to get a federal permit through the Federal Fish and Wildlife Service, okay? So bird depredation, if you want to lethally take them, we have to go through the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, their regional office out of Albuquerque, New Mexico, okay? They have this zone, which is Region 2 of Fish and Wildlife, and you do the same thing. You pretty much have to show that you have taken the measures, and we'll get into some other caveats, but you got to show that you've taken the other measures, and then you can apply for this permit. It's a 9-page permit. Ours is 1 page. But it's basically doing the same thing, just a little bit more with more check boxes, right? And I believe there is a fee on this one. I think it's $50. So you fill this out, same thing, just tell who you are, the problem you're having, the species. And there's a couple more steps on this one. Once you get this permit, it will authorize you to take those certain bird species that are causing your depredation. Okay, you got to list them. And then there's a reporting requirement. When you do kill these species, you have to report it. Okay. We don't have as much of that for our state permit. Feds require that. Okay. So that's a copy of what that is, and I think there's a copy in the 3-wing binders. Okay, so you can look at that and read through it. But if that's something that you guys need to lethally take birds, there is permits, and they work with you guys. They will authorize those things if you can demonstrate that damage. So there's just going to be a little bit more time delay, just because they're not here. But that's there for as a tool and a measure. Okay. I tend to see we don't get a lot of these. I've checked farms, and there has been some take, and they haven't got this permit. So I just wanted to throw that out there, that this would be required to lethally take most bird species. If you're having any kind of bird depredation and you want to lethally take them, okay? But there are exemptions, okay? So the federal law does have exemptions, kind of like we do. Let me just click through all these. Okay. So there are exemptions for these species. It's kind of washed out, but we'll show them. But blackbirds, cowbirds, crows, grackles, and magpies. You guys are like, what are those? Half of them. The ones I see around here, red-winged blackbirds, and probably grackles are the most common I see around here under this exemption. So if you are having problems with those two species, you're allowed to lethally take them without a special federal permit. That's one of the exemptions. But you need to make sure that you establish these things, right? That they're causing some ag damage, which that's pretty easy. You got to try to do some other control measures, okay? And you also have to use non-toxic ammunition, okay? What that means is you can't use lead. The federal government doesn't want you to use that if you're going to use this exemption, so you got to use like steel or a kind of a steel alloy, okay? And in the back of the book, it lists those, okay? And if you already use that exemption, not that the federal Fish and Wildlife come down here that often to look at fields, but if you're going to use that exemption, they're allowed to come down here and look at the depredation that's going on and seeing what's going on. And again, annual reporting. So you have to, there's instructions on how to do that. You got to report what you kill, okay? And again, this method is only after you've tried everything else federally, okay? So that's what those things look like. I just pulled that off the internet. So those are the exemption birds, at least in this area. Red-winged blackbird and grackle are two of the most common ones. We might have some cowbirds in your fields, I'm not sure. You guys see any of these other species?
I see cowbirds a lot. We don't have magpies or crows in
Right.
southern Arizona.
So cowbirds, yeah. I think that's a brown-headed cowbird. So anyways, that's another $1 million question. It's like, I have birds, I know what they are, right? So that's where, we can work with you and we can get out there and identify what's out there and then fill it into what you can legally do with these things, okay? So these are the exemptions, okay? There are some of the other exemptions if you work in these areas, like in California, but I don't know if you guys have farms in California, but these are some other species that you can take in these counties in California, okay? I don't think they apply in this room, but if you do have counterparts in those areas in Fresno, Napa, and Sonoma counties in California, the federal law allows you to take these species as well. Horned lark, I wish that one was here. We have a lot of horned larks in the fields, but that's not one of those exemptions, okay? House finches, I don't know if that's much of an issue, but. But anyways, for the horned lark, that's the one where you would just get that permit, okay, and you would list it under there. And maybe you have 5 species of birds listed under there that are causing your problems. That's what you would put on your application for the Fish and Wildlife Service, and they'd issue that permit. Very similar with us. You'd have a season, the authorized people are farmed to take them, and that's only for lethal take. You can still use the reasonable measures if you don't need to kill them, right? That law still protects you. Yeah. And even hazing. I was watching a guy the other day in some farm field, and I saw somebody walking around with a shotgun, and it's kind of comical. I didn't mean to laugh, but I was watching him. I was like, shotgun, what's going on here? And it was a freshly planted field with seed, and he would shoot blanks at these birds, and they just do a loop right around him, and he'd turn his back, they'd come around, and they were kind of laughing at him. I felt sorry for him. I was like, oh, this is ridiculous. They had the streamers, scarecrows, and all that. That would probably have been a good one to have a permit to probably knock a couple of those out. I don't know what bird species they were, but anyway, birds are a very big thing, and we really, and I don't know what the industry looks at birds anymore, where those are falling into the mixture of things, but they're a carrier of things, and I know that, buyers don't like, evidence of birds in the field. So that's something that is just going to increase. You're going to have to know more about bird species, Fences don't work for birds. Now, if you grow your crops in a greenhouse or a bubble, that would probably be the only way to exclude them, but they're not going away anywhere, unfortunately. So I would suggest if you do have these species and it's causing damage or, financial loss, let's go down this avenue and get you into this, okay? And let's see if we can fix that problem. Again, we talked about the measures for birds, and there's not a lot of stuff that really, it's a combination of those things. And there's not a 100% effective way to exclude these things out of there, so.
Question.
Yeah.
Like out there with cattle company, where you plant wheat around the field, you can't plant the wheat and then go to you and get a permit because they're in there the next day. Can you get a permit ahead of time knowing that they're going to be in there? Because they'll just wipe out a field just in 24 hours.
Yeah, and that'd be a question for the Fish and Wildlife Service, because I hear you. I mean, it's just a given. But again, just reading their law, it says you gotta demonstrate there's been depredation. And that might be just the history of it. You know, I've been planting this field for 5 years.
Yeah, I would assume.
And every year I'm having
previous losses and
Right.
anticipated losses going forward.
So I think you would have a case and just say, hey, before I take any losses, can you just give me that permit ahead of time? I think that common sense would apply. And I think if you could document that, say, hey.
Or reach out and talk to them ahead of time, and, you know, for us, you know, small game, and, you know, if it's quail that's causing a problem, or if it's rabbits that are causing a problem.
Yeah.
You know that this is a problem that's going to occur, come talk to us ahead of time, because again, it's a process we have to go through to get to that point. So if you know it's going to occur, come to us. And, you know, there's a little bit of question on the depredation permit, and how long it's good for. And we're gonna have all those questions is, okay, are you experiencing depredation year-round, during these months, you know, within 48 hours after planting? You know, we wanna know that kind of stuff. And you guys know all these questions, it's just that's the information you need to make that decision.
Totally legit, I hear you. And I would think that just common sense would say, yeah, I hear you.
But yeah, forethought, so, because if you know that's going to occur, have those conversations ahead of time. For us, we can do a quick turnaround, and with the feds, it's just that much harder to get through, so.
But we're a resource to help you out. You can still come to our office, and we can make those channels, help with those channels to go federally. Okay? So definitely use us as that nexus. So there are other species out there. Endangered Species Act is another act that protects endangered species. We do have some bird species. I don't really think they are attributed to your fields. They're more kind of wetland and riverine species. But the one that we really do have down here, you might have incursions, is the Sonoran pronghorn antelope. If you guys have ever had those on your fields. We do have an active management program for the pronghorn. They are in Unit 41 out in the Tapna, Welton area, and they could incur into your fields. That one's an endangered species that it's got heavy protection, okay? So that would be one where you're probably we're not gonna have a permit to take it, but we're gonna use some exclusionary methods and things like that, okay? So that's just one example. That protects some species out here. Ooh, what's that? Horses and burros. You guys brought that up. You guys are having problems in Bard, I think somebody said, right? Yeah. So I had invited BLM to this meeting. It was kind of last minute, my bad. But we do have contacts with the local BLM here, and they're aware of this presentation today. And if you guys have any questions, we'll direct you to them. But basically, the Bureau of Land Management is the one who manages horses and burros, okay? And they're protected under the Horse and Burro Act of the 70s, okay? So that's why you guys see so many burros out there, right? That there's a law protecting them, okay? There's no hunting season or things like that. Pre-71, when they weren't protected, there was a little bit more going on with burros, but horses and burros are protected by this federal act, okay? Depredation by burros and horses, it does happen. Like I said, last week during the deer patrol, I was going up Highway 95. I looked over there on some alfalfa fields near the Dome Valley Turnoff Road, and there was 15 horses in an alfalfa field. And so they were coming off YPG and going into their crops. I think a lot of the same things that would work for deer would work for burros and horses as far as that goes. But as far as, unfortunately, of taking them lethally, they're protected. So we would have to use exclusionary methods. And Bureau of Land Management, they also work with private landowners for health and safety and disease. You can work with them, and they will actually round some of these up and remove them to a storage facility or a temporary holding facility and adopt them out. So they will come down, and they have done that for farms. If you guys do complain and say, hey, I got some damage, you know, health and safety for food, they will work with private landowners, and they will remove burros if they have the manpower and the resources to do it. Okay.
Yeah, it says pretty expensive. I think they said around 50,000 or something last time they.
Yeah, and
rounded them up.
you know, BLM, the problem with horses and burros, and you know, there's problems, you know, with, you know, obviously in our realm with habitat and wildlife. It's just that it's really hard to manage these things because they're protected, so BLM has to house them, they can't kill them. You gotta remove them, which is a lot of work, and it's expensive, funding, and all kinds of issues with them. Unfortunately, Yuma, they're way above the herd management units, the numbers are supposed to be, and they're just around here. And so, they're protected, but what we can do is use these exclusionary measures, the cattle gates, things like that will work. So I think those are kind of the long-term measures for them.
I'll just say one thing,
Yeah.
with horses and burros, the local BLMs definitely, they recognize the issues. They're very supportive of trying to get their herds under control, not only on private lands, but within the herd management areas, which are way above their management levels where they should be, and they know that. It's just a matter of having the ability and funding to do something. And what we're hearing at the higher levels with the state director is Ray Swald is very supportive of trying to make some of that start to begin to happen and freeing up some money. Their adoption program actually, one of the last adoptions they did was really well received. There were more folks that showed up to pick up animals than there were animals, which is usually not the case. So we're actually expecting to see some movement in the herd management areas to get those numbers back down to where they're supposed to be. But where they're most responsive is on private lands, where we've seen them be the most responsive. So it's pretty meaningful. It's not, when we complain about it and we say, hey, we've got a sheep area, bighorn sheep area with too many burros in it, we don't tend to see a lot of action. But when someone calls up and say, hey, they're in my leafy green fields, they tend to be a lot more responsive.
Yeah. But yeah, it's a key. The local office here, they're really good at working with us. We have good relationship with them. So just get with us. We'll work with them for you guys. Okay.
And then just one more real quick distinction is there's two different issues. There's if there's a herd management area that's protected under the Wild Horse and Burro Act. If it's not a herd management unit, those are stray animals, right? That people have gotten rid of over the years. Some of them are reproducing out there. But like the ones that are on, the horses you see out going up 95, they're not protected under the Wild Horse and Burro Act.
Yes, they are.
That's a herd management area?
Yeah, we're on 95, and they're protected if they come off of that area.
Right.
If they're in proximity. But down by Ajo, we've got burros, those are just feral animals. But,
So there's another option. We can, we're willing to work with you guys to figure that out, whether that's an HMA, it's called HMA. If it's not, then we can work with the State Department of Agriculture, and they have resources as well if they're just stray animals. It's just a little bit different process. If you have it, just know that it's cumbersome, but we can work through it.
Yeah. The key is a lot of information thrown at you. Work with us. We'll figure it out. Okay. And that's what the next slide is, pretty much. There's a lot of stuff thrown at you. You have 3 reminders after this. It's like, what did he all say? But basically, this is just kind of some working knowledge. Get with us. You have some resources here, and whatever the issue is, be it burros, something that's federally protected, birds, or some game species, work with us. We'll put you the right way. Okay, if it's BLM, Fish and Wildlife, or us, we'll get you taken care of. Okay, because again, we have to work together. We have a mission, you have a mission, and they come together. So we'll work with you guys. Okay. And again, that kind of talks about the partnership we have. So wildlife food safety partnerships, we have these, right? So, the annual dove hunt, right? That's a classic example. We have tens of thousands of hunters coming down here, and they're usually hunting around ag fields, right? Fortunately, we don't have leafy greens in the ground at the time. But we produce outreach materials like this, our dove hunting regulations. We educate the hunting public. Stay out of leafy greens, or stay out of fields, period, right? Don't let your dog go on the field during the dove hunt, And so we work with you guys to get out this information source to users of the land. The deer hunt, right? Take your animal out of the field. Don't hunt a leafy green field. Don't clean your animal in the field. Remove it. So that's what we talk about on this slide is our cooperation and things we're doing together. This event today, it just supports both of our missions. So,
We appreciate it.
So with that, we're just going to go quickly. Yosie's going to cover just some quick animal ID identification, tracks and scat. And then at some point, if we can get some of them, I know Vicky's working on it, we have that track and scat glove box guide. I think it's really cool. And a lot of these slides, I think, kind of came from that, I think. So I'll let Yosi take over.
Yeah, Paula, do you know if you guys tracked any of them down? Because Gap was with Love Lots, track.
I think Shannon has
You didn't have any here?
No.
So we're trying to track
But
some
you can
down.
download it too, if you just Google Track and Scat Glove Box Guide, it's there, you can print it by yourself.
Did you guys hear that? You can print one yourself, say it again.
Yeah, if you just Google Track and Scat Glove Box Guide, you Google that, it will come up as a PDF and you can print it. Track and Scat Glove Box Guide.
And we're passing it around right now so everybody can take a look at it. I also passed around some field guides that you can buy at like a secondhand bookstore. I keep them in my truck just to identify different wildlife species that maybe you don't come across every day. Again, I'm Officer Yosi Robledo. I have everything south of Interstate 8 from the Colorado River to the Mohawk Mountains. So I'm a resource. Hablo español. I like to talk to the farm hands. I learn a lot from them and I educate them about hunts that are going on at the same time. So again, please use this as a resource. All of this information is probably not new to you. We're just going to talk about some quick wildlife species that you probably encounter. It's definitely not all inclusive, which is why I'd like you guys to take a look at those field guides. They're super helpful. So mule deer is the species of deer you guys encounter out in the field. Very characteristic by that black patch on their foreheads and the white rumps. Not to be confused with white-tailed deer, but we don't have to worry about that down here. They're mostly out east of Yuma. They like to hang out in the desert as long as in the agricultural areas. And I know they talked about rainfall and how that influences their movements and how they're concentrated. They do hang out in the Gila River bottom a lot, is where I've seen them during the hunts especially. They have a heart-shaped hoof with convex walls and oval-shaped pellets. They're scat pellets. Also javelina. Again, we mentioned that specific hunt in Unit 41 to help manage the javelina, since it's not a historic area for them. They're herd animals, usually active during the cooler parts of the day, early morning and night. They have blunt round tips on their hooves with 2 dew claws in the front foot and 1 dew claw on the hind foot. Their scat is dark brown to green in color, and you might notice different flora and seeds in their scat present. Bighorn sheep, you may or may not see these guys around, mostly around the Dome Valley area here in ag fields adjacent to mountains and hills. They have cloven hooves that are more linear than deer or javelina, and they're oval in shape with a slight point at the end. If you see how bighorn sheep interacting with domestic sheep, we want to know about it because of disease transmission issues. So if for some reason you have domestic sheep or goats in your areas and you see them interacting with bighorn sheep, that's definitely an issue and we need to know about it right away.
Or if you see domestics that are not contained, they're not being watched, that are just roaming, we definitely like to hear about it, whether it's domestic sheep. It's a huge issue for our bighorn sheep population. Definitely a big threat as far as disease potential.
Sonoran pronghorn, again, we mentioned them. They are protected and they're of huge interest to us because they went from 20 in the wild and now they're, I think, close to, what is it, 500, maybe slightly less. But it's a huge recovery effort. They're east of Yuma and Welton and in the Tacna areas. So be careful when you see these guys around because, again, they're of high concern for us. And if you notice, they have a very sharp tip at their hoof, on their hooves, which is easy to identify them from deer. Deer is more rounded and the Sonoran pronghorn have that sharp tip. Coyotes, again, something you most likely encounter everywhere. They adapt to urban and rural areas very well. Their paws will show evident claw marks on the ground. A cat won't do that. unless it's a cheetah, but we don't have cheetahs around here. So if you see claws on paw prints, it's most likely gonna be a canine of some sort, and if you don't see claws, it'll be some sort of cat. They have smaller hind feet than their front feet. You will see animal hair and bone in their scat. They have black to dark brown, and they like to mark their territory with their scat and urine. So probably not something you want hanging around your fields too much. Next, we have bobcats. We like to, a lot of people sometimes think they have mountain lions roaming their areas, but the way our rule of thumb is look at the tail. If it's a tiny little tail, it's most likely a bobcat. If it's a long tail, close to the size of its body, then you're probably seeing a lion. They're common everywhere. They're very secretive, so you probably won't see them. They like to do their hunting at night. Again, no claw marks because they retract them. They have 4 toes on the front and hind feet, and their scat is constricted with blunt ends. It's a little hard to see in the photos, but it's also in the binders. Again, here's the lion, the mountain lion. We have low occurrences in the desert Southwest, but they are around. They're just also very secretive. I've seen 2 in my career, and I guess that's like really high. I've known people who worked in my area for 10 years and hadn't seen a single one other than trap cameras. So they're very, very secretive. They see you, you might not see them. They can be found east of Yuma. Their main prey is deer. So I heard some landowners talking around here, they hoped they had a lion nearby so that it would manage the deer herd around their fields. Here we have cottontails and jackrabbits. Again, Richard mentioned that cottontails are a huntable mammal or a game species, while jackrabbits are not. They're very common. Both of their scat is oval in shape and composed of plant material. They have 5 toes, but only 4 show, and their hind feet are larger than their front. Very, very different in size, though. You'll notice the jackrabbits, why they're very distinctive long ears.
Do jackrabbits like to eat the same things as cottontail rabbits?
I believe they just like leafy greens. They don't really, I think they,
So they both like the same food?
I'm assuming they're
I've
pretty,
just never seen a jackrabbit in the field. Has anybody seen a jackrabbit in the field?
I've seen them a lot in the desert. I don't know about ag fields. But yeah, probably at night they come out.
It's probably in the orchards a lot.
Small mammals, and if you look at that field guide that's being passed around, there's a lot of different species of rodents, and I'm sure there's different ways to tackle each of them as well. Here we just have some ground squirrels and some pocket mice or cactus mice. Yeah, those, you'd have to go out and trap those little guys just to identify what they are, because I'm sure you can get 10 different species in a night. So that's something we'd also have to tackle very specifically.
And those are also another one under that 17239, that you can legally remove these. That's why you guys are allowed to use a lot of the heat traps out there for rodent control.
And that's to keep the non-target predators out as well. Striped skunks, you probably don't want to be around these guys. On occasion, you'll see them in ag fields. They're also found in habitats in citrus orchards. So we have some of what their prints would look like on the soil there. I don't know, I can always smell them because someone ran them over or something. I'm not sure what kind of exposure you guys are having to them out in the fields, but we have them around. And again, we talked about some livestock, some wild horses, wild burros. These are something that they, BLM manages them, they're federally protected. It's something else we have to kind of be more cautious of and take care of. Yeah, and you all know these guys are in high numbers in this area. And again, the books being passed around, take a good look at them, buy them at a secondhand store. They're very inexpensive if you buy them used. So,
And then, like you said, Paula mentioned that there's a link to that printable version of that SCAT guidebook, Lovelock guidebook. We can put that on, we can get that to you guys as well, the link to that, so that'll be very helpful.
yeah, and with this, I'll go ahead and hand it over back to Mike.
All right, so we talked about some of the other resources, USDA, APHIS, these guys are an arm of the Department of Ag. It can be a great resource. They do cost money. If you've got an issue, but they can come out, they can do lethal removals. They acquire all of the permits that they need to remove the animals. What a lot of farmers are doing is kind of pooling resources. So if they've got, let's say you've got a blackbird problem in an area, they're collecting 4 or 5 different farms, get together and approach bringing in some, kind of for those bigger problems that can't be handled on more of a local level. I know they spend a lot of time like around sheep herds with predator management because they have other options for removing predators than what the general public has. The Game and Fish Department uses these guys all the time for collecting samples. It's just a good resource to have, and might be an option if there's some, if you've got a big problem that we're not able to solve through these other methods.
Yeah, and then also, I think Chris Carrillo is his name out of Phoenix. He's the main contact. And I was gonna try to get him to this workshop, but he's a busy guy. But I know he's really willing to come down too, as if you guys have another venue. I know that he's come down before on events. So that might be a resource for you guys to get his knowledge and what he can do for you guys.
Just a tremendous resource, and he's always willing to answer questions as well. If we may reach out to him too, if you guys approach us and we're working through the problem, we may end up being one of the resources we're gonna lean on. Yeah.
Let me add something to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, USDA's Wildlife Services. If you guys, like say, decide to go for a permit for like horn marks, these guys have to come out first and fill out a form that accompanies your application. So these guys are going to be real important to you in some respects, okay? And when talking to Chris, if you call him up, he's free on the phone, but if he sends an agent out to your farm to do an assessment, he's told me in the past that you guys collectively could, say, bring a couple of farms together to cover the cost. So that he's really willing to help, and as mentioned earlier, he's been to previous farm expos in the past. So, great resource.
Online resource, Internet Center for Wildlife Damage Management. This is a great resource. If you haven't been to this website, you should check it out. Again, it's in the book. But species by species, it'll give you a whole litany of different options to deal with problems that people encounter, and just a really good resource. Our contacts, again, it's in the back of your book. Yosie, she'll be basically south of the interstate here. Richard will be north of the interstate. I'm a resource for wherever you're at. Courtney, if you've got any fields up in Ehrenberg or Cibola, she would be your contact. If you've got anything out east over in Gila Bend, or any of those, basically on the other side of Sentinel, Travis Clarkson, he's a resource. So again, those are in the binder for you.
Real quick question. And then also, I try to get a California Game and Fish representative here, but if you guys have stuff on the California side, get with us. We have those connections as well. If you have California state issues, we know there's game wardens and biologists and can work with you on those as well.
So the takeaway is, this is the 10,000 foot view of kind of what we need to work through. It's very nuanced, and it's going to change on a case-by-case basis. So the whole reason for having this workshop is to try to open those lines of communication, let you know the faces and kind of the resources that are out there. But it's, it's on you to reach out to us, let us know what problems you're having. We're happy to help with it the best we can, and if we don't have the answer, we're willing to help you guys find it. So, with that, all of the game and fish employees will stay here and be available if you want to talk about something one-on-one. If you've got something that the group would benefit from, please reach out to us. The food's here, Vicki, I think.
Yeah, the food's here.
So go ahead, grab a plate of food, and we're not going